best Easter sermon I ever preached. But before I get into that, let me give you some background. As a pastor, and this is self-confession, I did not like Easter Sunday when traditional church, and I'll tell you why. Many people would make Easter one of usually the 3 days out of the year that they would make it to church. You know, Christmas, Mother's Day, Easter. And so we would have a church full of people, a lot of whom they really didn't want to be there. But they came because it was Easter, and they had already been there Christmas, and then Mother's Day was coming soon. And so they came, but they were noisy. It was a fashion show for a lot of people. You could tell that people didn't necessarily want to be there. So every time Easter rolled around for me, in the beginning I was excited about it, don't get me wrong. But as the years progressed and I got to be a little bit older, I would find myself becoming grumpy when Easter time came around. And so I remember this one particular Easter morning. Family was getting ready. My son was very young then, and he was dressed up, kind of dressing up like Kellen is this morning. And, you know, because they were talking earlier about how it used to be Easter, we would dress up like that. And so I was rushing around the house, and I was already feeling grumpy, and so I got out. Family, we got in the car. I started pulling down out the driveway, and all of a sudden I remembered I'm supposed to do the children's sermon this morning in addition to the regular sermon. I jumped out the car, I grabbed something out of my yard, jumped back in the car, drove on to church. And when time for the children's sermon came around, this is where the best sermon came in. When that time came around, I gathered the children around, and I pulled out a lily that came out of my yard. And I said to the children, do you recognize what this is? And they said a flower. They said, do you know I got this out of my yard? And this came from the yard, and I want to tell you that a few weeks ago, this flower wasn't there. As a matter of fact, there was nothing there in that ground. The ground was bare. And all through the winter, the ground had been bare. But then this morning, as I was leaving to come and have an opportunity to spend time with you, I noticed this with all its beauty, and I wanted to come in to share this with you. And I said that that's really what we're celebrating today. We're celebrating the fact that that which seemed to be dead suddenly came back to life. That which seemed to be over suddenly had a new beginning. And there were some friends of mine that had come to visit that morning. They brought their mother with them, and their daughter came down as a part of the children. They got for the children's sermon. And after church was over that Sunday, they said, we've heard you preach a lot of times, but that was the best Easter sermon you've ever done. And I thought they were talking about my main sermon. They said, no, the children's sermon. It was the best one you've ever done. And as I thought about that and how today, many places around the world, people are celebrating Easter. Some are celebrating the literal meaning of Easter and thinking literally in terms of the master teacher Jesus rising from the dead and being resurrected on this day. And others are thinking about it in ways of being a story about transformation. And however you choose to believe it, I'm letting that be you. But this morning, I'm talking about our celebrating resurrection with the understanding of what it can mean for each of us, because if it's not about you, it doesn't have all of the power and all of the meaning that it can have. But I have to still admit that I had a little bit of resistance even this morning to this message. It's not because I would think that you all were going to be noisy and all of that, or it was going to be a fashion show or anything like that. I mean, I love Easter here at Open Heart. I'm telling you that right now. But it was just a part of me, and I didn't get in touch with it until early this morning, because I had gotten up several times to meditate and write down thoughts and all of that, and I've been doing it all week, and nothing really would come together And it came back to me yesterday as my wife Emma and I were walking through Overton Park. And we decided to go down one of those trails. And as we were walking down the trail, she said, you know, this reminds me of the movie Balto, and how he had to lead the dogs and all of that. And she started describing the story to me and telling me about how Balto had been, you know, betrayed at one point, and then at the end he became victorious and all of that. And then she said, when we get home, we're going to watch the movie. And I thought to myself, no, we're not. Well, I'm not going to watch the movie. I've got to get ready for my message with Open Heart tomorrow. And so while she watched the movie and enjoyed the movie, and I came in right at the end and the credits were rolling and all of that, so it was over by that time. But this morning it occurred to me why I didn't want to watch the movie. And that was because while I know in the end there was transformation for Balto, what got him there was a painful series of events. And something about me didn't want to go through that right then. I didn't want to see the stuff, the messy stuff that was happening with him. I didn't want to get caught up in all of that. And then it made me think about how it can be so easy when we start talking about the resurrection and the easy story to immediately jump to the victory and the victorious time, and where people are jumping around, but not really looking at how things got to that point. Because I think we have to go back, first of all, to Judas. And think about Judas. And now Judas gets a bad rap in things, but a lot of people are now recognizing that, you know, if you take the story of Jesus and his crucifixion, that Judas played an important part, that had he not done what he did, then that never would have happened. But even more than that, if we can think for a moment from the perspective of, in our own life, the betrayal that Jesus experienced, the betrayal when that internal Judas in us doubts, it brings fear, it brings all kinds of other things in our lives that keep us from the truth of who we are. And it causes us to end up suffering because Judas has its way within. How many of you can relate to the fact of thinking, I can't do this, I don't have any future in that, nothing's going to come of that? All of those things that betray us and deny us from the truth of who we are. That Judas effect, as I like to call it, that can happen for us. And we doubt ourselves. We have frustration. When we talked about last month, those feelings, those negative feelings come up, all of those things that happen for us, and how sometimes it's difficult in the midst of those things to really see that there's something different. So we find ourselves caught up in the messiness, if you will, of this story, because the second part of that is the crucifixion itself. But understanding that crucifixion, ultimately the story about it is that there are times in life when some things have to be destroyed in order for something new to come about. Now, if you've ever been in the kitchen when I cook something or bake something like I did this week, the kitchen will look a mess. Destroyed. There's pots and pans and bowls and everything all over the place. Because the kitchen that was once pristine and looked nice and all of that, after I get done in there, it's going to be messed up. But the end result is going to be something delicious. The end result is going to be something great. But it's the process that in between that something happens, there's something that's kind of messy and not always pretty and not always pristine and not always happy and not always the kinds of things that we often talk about, you know, those I start my day with love, peace, and joy kinds of days. But sometimes it's dark and gloomy and messy and not the best of times. And so if we were to just take it right in that moment, if a person would just walk in, I'm not going to eat anything out of this kitchen looking like it is right now, not understanding that it's a part of the process. To build a house, if you've ever been to a construction site, at the beginning of a construction site or even rehabilitation, you will see that it's messy and it doesn't look good and there's stuff all over the place and all of that and things are happening. I thought about a painter, how a painter has to destroy and crush tubes of paint in order to paint a masterpiece. That there's that interim period where things don't necessarily go in ways that we can see them in a hopeful light. But if we hold out, if we understand that this is a part of the process, that crucifixion many times is necessary for something new to emerge. And so I think about that, and then how that, if we go on with the story, that second day, I have a friend that did a sermon that I thought was magnificent one time called The Children of the Second Day, when those people who had followed Jesus and who had been a part of his company and his group, how they saw him crucified, they saw him dead, and then that next day, they were sitting there, not knowing what to do, because now all of a sudden, that point in their life and the things that they thought were happening, all of a sudden it seemed like it all was lost. And how many times have we found ourselves that we're just kind of muddling around and trying to find our way and make our way, and we can't quite see it, that the things that we thought were working don't seem to work, and the things that we tried didn't seem to deliver the results, and the things that we thought were going to happen for us hadn't quite delivered yet. A friend of mine who's a New Thought teacher calls it the clickety-clack. And he says, you know, when you clickety-clack and all that, that when we do our spiritual mind treatment, our prayer, and those kinds of things, that period between setting our intention and it manifesting is sometimes it can get like when you're riding a bike and you change gears and you hear that clickety-clack. The transition in between setting the intention and manifestation, sometimes it's not always easy to endure. Now I know we can stand here and say, oh yeah, I've got faith and I'm going to fake it till I make it, and I know absolutely, but ultimately there are a whole lot of us, me included, that there are those days when being able to stand there and say with certainty, yes, it's going to happen, can be a little rough. And that's what I imagine that those people were feeling in the second day, the children of the second day. Many of us can identify with being children of the second day, where we hear the message of hope, but we're not quite there yet. We hear the message of transformation, but it doesn't quite resonate yet. We still are in that place where oftentimes our doubts are more than our faith, and more than our confidence, more than our assurance, more than our being able to say, I know it's going to happen. We become like those people that Ernest Holmes used to talk about when they set their treatment and then they would, go back, it's not working, being akin to people who plant a seed and then they go back and they dig it up to see if it's growing. Sometimes we find ourselves in that place. That's when one of the most important things that we can do is to turn within. Because within is the power that allows us to get from betrayal, crucifixion, second day, to victory. When we turn within. The Apostle Paul wrote, I want to know Christ. When we talk about Christ's universal spirit and the power of his resurrection. When we get in touch with the resurrection power, that place that is in us, that is divine, that place that is in us, that is the power that creates worlds, that place in us that is overcoming, that place in us that is powerful, that place in us. And sometimes it may take a moment or two. It may take more than 3 days. It may take 3 weeks. It may take 3 months. It may take 3 years. But knowing that it's there, knowing that the default for everything is life, knowing that the universe conspires on our behalf, knowing that with God all things are possible, knowing that there's a power for good in the universe that is greater for you, greater than you, and you can use it, knowing victory is at hand. Knowing that. We go back and we visit that story, and then we understand once again that we are a part of a magnificent power, a magnificent God, a magnificent creator, a magnificent universe that never leaves us nor forsakes us, that never lets us alone, that is always there. And even when we at the moment feel like that we can't sense it, it is still there. I like what Mary Ann Morrissey says when she talks about in rock climbing, there is the commitment move. And that is that as you're going up, there's a point at which you have to swing out in order to get up to the next level. And a part of that swinging out is that when you do so, there's nothing underneath you. It's all air and it's all down. But when you make that commitment move, what you are doing is you're saying that I trust that what's up there that's a little bit higher is greater than what I've been standing on. So this morning, what's your commitment move? What's your commitment move? What's your next level? What's your resurrection story? What's your new possibility? What's your new life? What's yours? This is the day. We celebrate. We know it's already happened. We know the end of the story before we even begin. And now, make your commitment. It's yours. So it is.
So it is.
This is called the rain song.
the torch, we on the soul. This is the mystery of the quotient. Upon the soul, little rain must fall. Just a little rain. Ooh, yeah, yeah.
Great.